today on Ag News Daily.
It is a really good way for younger people to get back into ag. It's an avenue there that is very accessible, and it's a relatively low capital cost to get in when compared to other things.
Well, welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. You've got Tanner and Delaney, too, sitting here again.
Hello, hello.
Welcome back. It's always good to have fun friends in the studio. I don't know if I'm going to be happy or sad when the other Delaney comes back.
I guess we'll have to see.
Yes, we will. But as we always start off, we're going to hit a little bit of weather headlines. Of course, it's been a hot week for most of the Midwest so far, but the next 2 weeks are expected to bring above average precipitation to much of the Corn Belt. This is according to the National Weather Service's Climate Prediction Center. And of course, Delaney, we've seen a lot of rain in the Corn Belt this year so far. But the only areas that are predicted to experience dry conditions through the middle of July are the Dakotas and northern Minnesota. Minnesota is currently one of 2 Corn Belt states without any areas of drought as of the July 2nd drought monitoring report. Certainly feels like here in central Iowa we've been struggling to get spraying and side dressing done because it rains all the time. Temperatures, though, are still predicted to rise above weekly averages. Later in July, though, the next heat wave will hit the United States and is expected to cause more difficulties in the western half of the Corn Belt. We certainly have a lot of different planting windows at this time, so we'll see if that affects tasseling, with 55% of the corn in good to excellent condition and winter wheat struggling at just 40% good to excellent condition. Farmers will be hoping for this timely rainfall and cool nighttime temperatures to keep the drought conditions at bay and keep those crop conditions solid. So it'll be interesting to continue to see how the rest of July plays out.
It really is. I mean, July is always kind of like that guess and see type of month, you know?
Yes.
So corn and soybeans condition ratings have increased over the past week following that favorable weather, but some areas of concern have those higher temperatures that we've been seeing, along with the remnants of that tropical storm barrel as they make their way inland. The USDA says 68% of corn is rated good to excellent, with 24% of the crop silking and 3% at the dough-making stage, both ahead of the five-year averages. With that, 68% of soybeans are rated good to excellent, with 34% blooming and 9% at the pod setting stage, again seeing both faster percentages than the past averages. 63% of winter wheat has been harvested compared to the normal rate of 53%, while 75% of spring wheat is rated good to excellent, with a total of 59% of the crop being headed.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the progress continue to happen, but we're going to dive back into another REDSTAR update to talk about the agronomic process out in the field. Hey, listeners, it's time for a REDSTAR daily update. We're going to run a couple of red lights, or maybe drink a couple of red lights here during these segments with the folks from REDSTAR. Again, hanging out with Tom and Brody and Ryan here to talk soybeans and fungicide. Last week, if you missed it, we focused on the corn side of things. But, Tom, why do we care about soybeans?
Well, because all the crush plants we're putting up across the country is why we care about soybeans. Soybeans are real critical right now. Again, like we talked earlier, April 10th to June 10th, we're going to have, basically plantings taking place. And so, the timing of fungicide applications are going to be all over the board. R3 is really the right time for fungicide applications. And why is it the right time? That's when pod fill is basically starting, right? We're getting, those pods are just starting to grow. That's where we're going to start, see the nitrogen transfer from the plant, where the nitrogen has been stored in the plant, and it's going to start transferring itself to those pods, and that's going to give us our grain fill. And at that time, fungicides have just been so critical for us from a disease standpoint. Whether you're in 15-inch row beans or 30-inch row beans, we tend to have a lot of heat, a lot of humidity, and we get a lot of plant diseases at that time. But it's also a key time we don't want to forget about the nutritional requirements going on in that plant as well.
There are a ton of nutritional requirements happen at that time, especially, you back up to R2 a little bit, because you flowered at R1. Those flowers have turned into pods. We're trying to fill some of those. We're flowering a new round.
and have a little pods on, and then we're flowering a third round that's on top of the plant. And so there's a lot going on. It doesn't know if it's in vegetative or reproduction all at that same time, because we need to make a huge amount of energy within that plant. And if you look at just average beans, say 55, 60 bushel beans versus like 100 bushel beans, there really isn't a big difference until we get to R2. And R2 is where that thing really drives apart, and from a nitrogen phosphorus standpoint, when you look at tissue samples. And so, one of the most frustrating things, I think, when farmers, go camp at the state fair and stuff, beforehand, they'll go look at their beans and they'll count their pod. They're like, man, we got 300 bushel beans here. And then when we get back from state fair, it's like, where did all the pods go? And it's because it's sloughing them off, because we don't have the protein levels. We hadn't created as many carbohydrates early on to then put that, to create that level of amino acids and proteins in the plant. And so how can we supplement that? That's where Elevate Plus comes into play. That's where NovaStar comes into play. But also we need that last charge of those nodules to be able to fixate a higher amount of nitrogen for us. And that's where like a boron moly comes into play, and what the moly does to be able to stimulate that nodal root growth and protein production. So we can retain a higher percentage of those pods through late August. Obviously a rain does help in doing that, but those are the ways that we've seen and been able to prove out that we can supplement that and increase your soybean yield.
Yeah, and we look at soybeans at R3, especially when that whole process starts. Nitrogen, potash, sulfur, boron, and you mentioned a key one in moly. Moly is so important because it's going to help drive that nitrogen reductase that takes place in that plant. It just helps with that nitrogen conversion. But if you can get those 4 or 5 nutrients with your fungicide at R3, you're just going to see much better soybeans than what you would normally. And one of the things, and if I knew how to do it, I'd be living on an island somewhere. But every bushel of beans takes about 5.5 units of nitrogen. Beans take more nitrogen than corn, and for some reason, we forget about that. Now, do we go out and directly apply anhydrous ammonia or 32 to our beans? No, we don't. Now, as you get in irrigation, there's places, Ryan, where we do that, right?
Yeah.
We run summer solution and K-Star on those beans. Brody, as we get into Iowa and Minnesota and those places where we don't have irrigation, what's been your preferred way to help drive some of those nutrients into soybeans?
Part of it's going to depend on, what do you think what has your historical yield potential been? What is it this year? I mean, you got a more economical route where, you got NovaStar and boron moly. Mm-hmm. You can go out there at R2 or, late R2, early R3, hit it with that. If you want to push those beans even further, that's where like a NovaStar, Elevate Plus with maybe K-Star. The K-Star is really big, especially if we are turning off hot and dry at that time frame. The plant can't bring up much potassium, and if you look at the uptake curve, there's a high amount of potassium being taken up there. That's even more effective than just a general potassium acetate in the K-Star. So it still kind of depends on what's happening at that time frame, and going back to the uptake curves. What becomes your limiting factor when things get dry and the plant can naturally bring it up from the soil?
Yeah, and once again, it's like we talk. Let's watch the weather. Let's see what's going on and evaluate where you're at that particular time, because it's going to be different. Some places catch rain. Some places are going to stay dry. The nice thing about the portfolio that we have at REDSTAR branded is we've got products that can fit pretty much any one of those gaps to help that plant physiologically drive for maximum yield.
That's right. So, Ryan, if they're interested in looking at those products, how do they find you guys?
Look us up on Facebook, Twitter, REDSTARAndy.com, REDSTARbranded.com.
I love it. Guys, appreciate it. We know we've got more tips to share with our listeners, so we'll be back again next week. Well, thanks again to REDSTAR for joining us and giving us those few tips, Delaney.
Bloomberg reported on Monday that grain prices have slumped to the lowest level since the pandemic as Tropical Storm Beryl is expected to bring rains to the Midwest, potentially adding yields at a critical time for the crop development. The Bloomberg Grains Sub-Index, which tracks future for corn, soybeans, and wheat in Chicago and Kansas markets extended that this year's losses to 17%, trading at the lowest level since December of 2020. Wasn't that a time?
Yeah, that's certainly one I think a lot of us don't want to remember.
I agree. In addition, Reuters' Karen Braun reported Wednesday that speculators entered July with their most bearish ever mid-year views on Chicago corn and soybeans, and prices have recently touched again the lowest level since 2020, as supply fears have all but vanished.
I appreciate Karen. We used to have her on the podcast. Maybe she's a guest we should have back.
Let's bring her back. Again, the following U.S. grain prices could mean significant financial losses for producing corn and soybeans in 2024. Of course, the usual caveat applies that this is not a done deal yet. It could still turn hot and dry in the second half of the growing season, and prices could rebound. I mean, what's a growing season if it's not?
That's right. And I know there's a lot of listeners out there that are hopeful, but I think a lot of them have a little pessimism in it right now.
I don't blame them. Chief Commodities economist from StoneX Financial said in a note to clients that favorable row crop weather provided the recipe for widespread selling in the grain and oil seed markets, with a few buyers jumping in to slow the momentum at this point. Crop prices have also been pressured by sluggish global demand. U.S. exports have been lagging behind, with importers and top commodity buyer China opting for those purchases in rival Brazil, where the weaker currency is boosting soybean sales. Meanwhile, American corn growers are holding the largest stockpiles of grain on their farms since 1988, thanks to the high production costs and, of course, low prices.
It's almost like our listeners are getting two commodity reports in this episode, but very timely in itself. So appreciate you for doing that. We've also seen some news come out from the U.S. EPA. They announced that they expect to finalize biofuel blending volumes for 2026 into 2028 late next year. So no news yet this year. We're talking next year. U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa says he's frustrated with the agency's delay of action on biofuels. Producers were anticipating final renewable volume obligations by November of this year. As stated, that'll happen next year now. According to the Biden administration's spring 2024 Unified Agenda of Regulatory Actions released last Friday, the EPA will tentatively plan to release its proposed RVOs for 2026 and beyond in March. Then you have to wait until December of 2025 for their final ruling. Speaking with other ag reporters, Tuesday, Grassley said that the EPA's timing could negatively impact the biodiesel and renewable diesel market and producers. I think this is going to lead to more plants being shut down, more unemployment, and more harm to soybean prices, is what Chuck Grassley said. Earlier this year, Chevron Renewable Energy Group shut down 2 Midwestern biodiesel plants, citing poor market conditions resulting from the weak biodiesel volumes under the federal renewable fuel standard. So we have more headlines that are tying together, and unfortunately, not a lot of positive news for the future.
However, something exciting coming to Central Iowa. After years of planning and 15 months of construction, Wyffels Hybrid officially opened their new Iowa site on July 10, 2024, with more than 200 full-time employees gathered in Ames, Iowa for the official ribbon-cutting ceremony led by company president John Wyffels. I had a few friends attend that. They said it was pretty exciting.
It's been fun to watch it being built right here in our area.
With the new facility located approximately 150 acres near Interstate 35 and Highway 30, it will help ensure that Wyffels' growing customer base continues to enjoy industry-leading products and support throughout the growing season.
I know they mentioned if you're coming to Farm Progress Show and want a tour, just to reach out to them because you can go and take a look.
Perfect. Again, the new warehouse and distribution center brings seed closer to those customers here in Iowa, South Dakota, and southern Minnesota. In addition to the storage and distribution capabilities of the site, it also includes research and agronomy test sites available to Wyffels sales team members, seed sale representatives, and customers for those tours and agronomy days. So maybe you can get one at the Farm Progress Show.
Look at that. Took the words right out of your mouth.
You sure did. With the continued growth and future expansions of the seed corn production capabilities and enhanced research and corn breeding functions, as well as meeting and training resources with the site. Site employees got to work this afternoon, or after their ribbon cutting with postseason activities as they prepare for that first bound shipment slated for December of 2024.
Yeah, I ended up partnering up with one of the district sales managers on a round of golf, which surprised me. And I spent the whole round just giving him a hard time. So the invite is to all of our listeners. We did see Tyson's Food pork plant in Perry, Iowa, that ended its production on June 28th, but the city officials are now optimistic that the plant will be sold and reopened under new ownership. Perry City Administrator Sven Peterson said that Tyson officials have been very open to communicating with the city in regards to the future of the plant after its closure left more than 1,200 people without work. So far, Tyson has told the Perry administrator that they have had several other companies tour the plant, and there is a chance that the facility will reopen under new ownership. But there has not been given a timeline yet, so that is possibly some positive news. While in operation, the Perry plant killed 9,000 hogs each day, which were sourced from some of the 6,000 pork farms in Iowa, which market more than 45 million head annually. These hogs have likely been sent to Tyson's 3 other pork processing plants in Iowa to cover the demand. The Storm Lake plant currently kills 17,250 head per day. The Waterloo plant harvests 19,500 hogs per day, and the Columbus Junction plant does a little over 10,000 hogs daily. Of course, this closure hit Perry's number one employer, and that will be felt down to the other businesses in town. Peterson said losing a large number of students in the school district could also affect the district's budget could affect the school district budget by more than $2 million. But thankfully, the school has a year to figure out how to plan for those budget cuts. Other businesses won't have the luxury of having that time frame. He stated, "We will continue to stay optimistic and hope that the plant will reopen." But now, Delaney, it's time to kick over to our interview conversation today. We have our guest, Owen from Terraplex, a Midwest drone application company, talking about how drones can be used on the farm. Hey, listeners, it's time for a What's Working in Ag segment, and we are doing this one based upon your questions. We love it when you reach out to us and want to know more about a topic. We've now talked with Terraplex twice on 2 full shows, but now we're going to spend just a couple of minutes with Owen Jenks. Owen is the field operations manager, and we're going to talk more what it's like to have that drone in the field and what exactly we need to do about that. Welcome to the podcast, Owen.
Thanks, Tanner. It's good to be on.
And we are a little bit ahead of schedule from when this show comes out, but congratulations, recent graduate of the Iowa State University, best school in the Midwest, best school in the country.
I'd like to say it's the best ag school that we have in the country. So
there you go. Go Clones. So we're going to focus today on the custom application side of Terraplex. Yep. But before we get into that, I want to know why you have or how you have the experience that you have having just graduated from Iowa State.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I grew up on a grain farm in western Illinois. And so kind of growing up there, when the drones first started coming out, that's something that I guess I expressed an interest in as well as my dad. And so we went out that first year and we purchased, it was a DJI MG1P. My dad purchased that for the farm. And so we went out and did some of our own acres with that. And so that was a 2.5 gallon tank. To put that in perspective, we've got up to 13.5 gallon tanks on our biggest drone now. So we went from about doing 60 acres a day to our drones can now do 50 acres an hour.
Oh, that's adding productivity.
It definitely is. So from there, I enjoyed it. So I went out and I purchased my own spray drone and started an own spray drone business. So I ran that for 2 years. And then I had sold that last year and went to work for a land investment fund for a year. And the drone industry just drew me back. So I met the guys there at Terraplex and have kind of been working part-time for them ever since. So
how old were you when you bought your first drone?
So the one I purchased, I'd have been 19, but I was 18 when I first started running them. So it would have been after my senior year in high school that summer is when I first started running drones. So I've been around the drones for a while, even for my age.
So do you think that's the trend, though, on the drone side connected to agriculture? Is it a lot of younger individuals starting to adapt this technology?
So I think we're getting a mix of both. We've got a lot of younger individuals coming in, but we've got some older ones as well. whether it be they're the one signing the check or they really like the technology, but maybe they've got a son that they want to come and run it. But it is a really good way for younger people to get back into ag. It's an avenue there that is very accessible, and it's a relatively low capital cost to get in when compared to other things too.
Sure. Yeah, we've exchanged a lot of stories on this podcast about how individuals come back to the farm and what gets added, whether it's a hog confinement, which is a lot more capital intensive, or it's adding a custom business, and this is one of those types of avenues. So having just graduated, you've got your role at Terraplex. So what are you responsible for at Terraplex?
So my role is our field operations manager there, and so I'm responsible for our custom applications. So a lot of that takes place with communicating with our pilots where they need to go for the day. A lot of that's, I guess, done on the back end, communicating with farmers and co-ops on how that scheduling looks. Right now we're booking a lot of acres out and kind of building some processes and procedures for our pilots to go through that'll just make it smooth and efficient to go. We're big fans of the crawl, walk, run principle, so we've got some small jobs here we're trying to do so that we can get efficient in what we're doing, and kind of just revamp that before we send all of our pilots out to do it.
I want to get to the pilot part here in a little bit, but you mentioned before we got on the mics that you're headed from here to go spray some wheat for fungicide, and then you've got a couple of herbicide jobs, but where do you see the most demand for your drones being? What type of application?
So I think a lot of it is going to stay with what we've typically seen aerial applications. So that's going to be your corn and soybean fungicide. That's kind of our bread and butter of our business. We do see kind of some growing demand in cover crops. A lot of that is dependent on government programs and how all that works out for a lot of guys. Just because there's some pretty big payments that are potentially out there, but we're kind of still trying to see how that all works out.
So if somebody wants you or Terraplex to come custom apply, how do they book that service?
Yep, so they'll go to terraplexconnect.com, or they can contact one of our location managers. If they've got even more questions, they are free to call me. My cell phone number is 309-297-1580. So they can go ahead and call me there at that number, and I can answer any questions that they've got about custom app.
Now, how do they know that they may need to employ the use of a drone? What are some common instances to where it makes sense to reach out to you guys?
Yeah, so, I mean, really any field that a plane or helicopter we can do. Especially when you get into areas, though, where you've got a tree line, you're around houses. We feel that we're able to better cover those areas than a plane or a helicopter. Now, we still cannot guarantee that we'll be able to get 100% of those fields because as someone that runs a corn or soybean planter myself, I like to plant under trees sometimes. I don't know why farmers do it, but we do. Nothing grows there. Drones and trees do not get along very well. So that's why I say we can do most of your field because we've got to stay back a little ways from that, and really you wouldn't be growing anything there anyways.
Yeah, that's a good point. I was driving down the road to go work on the field cultivator and couldn't figure out why one of the fields looked like it had a real bad weed issue. Mm-hmm. And I ended up looking to the opposite side of the road to see that there was some rye spread for cover crops. And I can only assume that was done by plane. And it was a drift factor.
And it's amazing when you see these drones operate. They'll come up to that last 2 or 3 rows there on your end rows, stop, move over, and keep going. And you're getting spray in all those end rows, even though it stopped right there. It's pretty cool to see the vortex that it puts down and really the amount of downforce that comes off those drones. I mean, you're getting coverage from the bottom leaf, top and bottom of it, all the way up to the top one. Yeah. Whereas some other application methods have sometimes lay it on top or not knocking the plane or the helicopter guys, but when those guys have to pull off to miss a telephone pole, their spraying is a lot higher. Mm-hmm. Those guys are they're a lot more ballsy than I am. I would be pulling up way sooner than they are, and it would be a terrible job. But that's why I'm flying a drone and not a plane.
So now let's get into what the listeners really came here to hear, and this is about the piloting side of things. We've had so many questions about how do I get my pilot's license? Can I create a custom business? How do I weave myself into the fold of turning this hobby into a passion, into a business? So let's first start out. What does it take to become a drone pilot?
So yeah, you need your Part 107 license. That's just through the FAA. So that is your license to be able to operate a drone for business use. So realistically, anybody, whether you're flying a little Mavic up to these big spray drones, you need your Part 107. So then in Iowa, you'll need to go get your state pesticide applicator's license, which is your 11F. And then from there, you need to go get a Class 3 medical. So that's through the FAA, just kind of saying that you're fit to fly.
That's interesting, right? Because you're controlling it. But from what I've understood during these last couple of episodes, how physically healthy do you really need to be?
No, it's kind of something that we talk about internally, and it's like, I don't really understand why we need this, because these drones are operating autonomously. We've got old guys that have been able to run them. It really does not take much physically to run it. The most physical part is getting the drone in and out of the truck. That's all it really comes down to, because these fly completely autonomously. It's sitting on the ground. You load it with chem switch batteries, and you'll slide a button on your phone or on your controller, depending on what brand you're using, and it'll take off. It'll go, and it's actually smart enough where it's able to optimize its route based on where you stopped last time. So it'll start with a full pass rather than deadheading down there to pick it back up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so they're pretty smart.
Well, exactly. And that's great to know. So we get our license. You said that was the first part.
Yep.
And then we got to pick out the drone that fits what we expect to use it for.
Yep.
If we're going to use it on our own farm or if we're going to try and run a business, obviously we know Terraplex can help with that from past conversations.
Yep, for sure.
What if I buy one from my farm and I think I want to also do some custom work?
Yeah, so a lot of your licenses that you'll need are very similar. You might just kind of want to change your insurance up a little bit on that, but that's something that our salespeople are able to help out guys with a lot. One thing we do encourage is, especially if it's your first year flying, not to overbook acres. Most of us have been there before where we've been told by someone on how much it can do, and then we get out there and we realize our skill level is maybe a little different than what an experienced person's is. So you might not be able to cover as many acres as maybe the book says, and our salesmen are really good at being able to set realistic expectations, because most of us have run our own custom app businesses before and kind of been told one thing and ended up seeing another. So
one of our good friends of the podcast, Kelly Garrett, always says that he's the limiting factor on his farm. So you're probably not wrong.
yes,
I get out there, and if I've got the drone, I'm probably the limiting factor for the productivity rather than the machine itself.
That is 100% correct. Most of our crashes we see are pilot error. Now, someone might not necessarily think it's pilot error, but usually at the end of the day, it comes down to pilot error, whether they were way too close to something, or a lot of guys trying to land on top of a trailer. Sometimes they're just off a little bit or weren't paying attention, thinking about something else, and ends up with a drone crashed off the side. So a lot of it is pilot error, and that's something that eventually it gets less and less just as people learn how to fly their drones more efficiently.
And that makes a lot of sense to me. So if we've got somebody that's interested in doing custom work, can they reach out to Terraplex? Do you have a need for custom pilots?
So we do a little bit. So our goal this year is to cover over 100,000 acres.
Wow.
So most of that will be done by our pilots, but we will probably need a little bit of custom help. So whether that's through guys that we've already bought drones from, or that have bought drones from us, or other individuals. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis as the kind of workload, as we figure out how the workload is going to be this summer. So
that's good. And I think I remember the team saying, if I don't know where to start, I can start with Terraplex, and that sales team will help with the licensing process, will help with the selection process, and help with training.
Yep, so we're kind of a full-service business. So I'm mainly on the custom application side of things, but we've got a whole team dedicated to the licensing and training that needs to go into that. Our salespeople are very educated in all of that aspect as well, so they're able to set you up with the right drone. They know the right licenses that you need, and they're even able to help you on trailer setups if that's something you're looking for too.
Oh, I forgot about the trailer setup. That's right. I know that they can go to terraplexconnect.com in order to get that information, but I want to know now, what are you most excited for your first summer out of college, working a full-time job with Terraplex in this industry that's continuing to grow?
So for me, I'm most excited to help farmers. So growing up on a farm myself, we've seen application jobs that have been done that necessarily aren't up to par. And I look on all the drone Facebook groups, and you see guys that the application wasn't done right. I guess I've applied them myself, so I know the job that needs to be done right. And we're not necessarily looking for a one-time sale here on our custom app. We're looking for customers that come back year after year. So we're wanting to do that right for the customer. If that costs us a little more money to do it right, that's okay. We're going to do it right. We want that farmer's crop to be in the best shape that it can be.
Well, that's good. You gave your cell phone number out earlier. Let's give it out one more time before we wrap up. So if anybody has questions, they can reach out to you.
Yeah, that's 309-297-1580. And again, just call with any custom app questions that you have, and we can get those answered for you.
All right. Well, again, congratulations on the recent graduation. Good luck this summer, and I hope you have a lot of fun doing it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Tanner, do you have any market commentary for us this week?
I don't know. You did it so well in the beginning with your headlines. I'll just hit on a little bit of the prices to wrap our show up today. Grain futures are higher this morning after a bearish streak ahead of the USDA report that comes out. Many future contracts hit or were very close to those contract lows, like you were mentioning, Delaney, in the recent days. The rally today is likely a little short covering. Corn was only up 6 cents, soybeans are up 7 cents, and wheat futures were up 8 to 13. Of course, we can see those open on Friday, possibly down as we track the overnight. Livestock futures are quietly higher this morning after a rough past couple of days. August feeder cattle have fallen nearly $10 from the high on Monday to the low yesterday. Feeder cattle futures were up $1.40 to $1.70. Live cattle up 60 cents, and lean hogs are near steady to start off our day today. Throwing a little dollar news, the U.S. dollar index is down 70 points this morning, and the dollar is reacting to a better-than-expected CPI report that came out showing inflation pressure is beginning to ease. The stock market is trading near steady, while crude and other oil futures are down nearly 50 cents. I know a lot of folks were surprised to see red on the NASDAQ and paying closer attention to the overall economy. So I think that pretty much wraps up our headlines for today. Are you excited for the weekend?
I sure am. Are you?
I think so. I think it'll be a great time, especially the month of July for a lot of our listeners. So we'll be back again next week. But what do you say for today, Delaney? Should we let the listeners go?
We should let them go.